fireside format at the hipster events that hopefully can give a different perspective, different angle on some of the aspects in the gaming industry. And today, our special guest that you already can see is Ms. Jannica Sand. Very pleased to have you here. Welcome, Jannica.
Hi, thank you for the invitation. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but can you hear me fine?
We can hear you very well. So you're actually with us. Thank you very much and welcome. Jannica Sand is Group Senior Counsel at William Hill for just about 2-3 months now. And formerly she was for many years, approximately 8 years, the General Counsel as well as Head of EU and Policy Affairs with MGA in Malta. So and Jannica has had different roles in that regard, a long time as a regulator, and now you are working in-house as a legal counsel. She holds a doctorate degree from the University of Malta and a master's degree in computer and communication law from Queen Mary in London. Jannica, so I think to start with, I can't help but to approach you with an obvious comparative question. When you look at your past roles at MGA that you have worked for a long time, and now looking at your first experiences as an in-house counsel, where do you see maybe parallels and as well as differences?
Yeah, so I was at the MGA for almost 8 years, I think, and in various roles, but always in the legal department. And it was one of those jobs where I started climbing the ranks within the organization. So the organization was a very special place in my heart. And I not only left the MGA to move to William Hill, but I also left Malta to move to London. But ironically, I couldn't be there because I'm back in Malta for the week. I couldn't stay away from the sunshine, to be honest. So it's a very different experience being with an operator as opposed to being with a regulator, of course. But I would say that the shift isn't as hard as people think, but also maybe because I came from the Malta regulator, and traditionally the Malta regulator has always maintained a very close relationship with businesses and with the operators because of the way in which it formulates its policy and in the way in which it regulates the industry is actually maintaining a very close relationship with the industry. So it didn't seem like an alien shift, you know. So it was almost a natural step in my career, to be honest. Obviously it's a different perspective because with a regulator you have a generic overview of operators and the various operations of various operators. And then when you join an operation, you're seeing detail and you're seeing things that would not have interested a regulator. So it's a very different aspect of the business. But having a background with regulator definitely helps with joining an operator. And I would say that the shift is also very positive because once you've been with a regulator for so long, you have an ingrained culture of compliance that you are then transferring to the operator. So you have like hard black and white lines and what is fine and what isn't. So you're transferring that culture of compliance back to the operator. So it's actually a very positive thing, and I would say for all parties involved because I guess regulators know that there are compliance people within operators, and operators are getting the experience of someone who's been in the industry for quite a while, I guess.
That makes a whole lot of sense, and thank you for your comments. I would like to come back to what you said about the MGA as being rather close and involved with the industry also. I understand there's a fairly open channel of communication from MGA to the industry, certainly different to many other jurisdictions. You have also worked on issues that you have seen coming from the industry or being on the minds and hearts of the industry. When you look back at your former role, what would you say were these main issues that the industry would approach MGA?
Okay, so I think the MGA has a culture of consultation also in the way in which it forms its policies, right? So when and that differs to other regulators, but that is not to say that other regulators are not doing it in the right way. I think one of the most interesting things about this job, and I entered this job as a senior counsel regulatory, so one of the most interesting things is understanding the regulatory regimes in other countries and the culture that actually underpins those regimes. And like I said, the Maltese regulatory culture always was one actually consulted with operators, and I remember consulting on player protection framework. I was one of the drafters of the Maltese framework, and there was a huge consultation with the industry. And the good thing is that I can now see the other side and how that is actually applied in practice. But it's a different culture, and within other jurisdictions, then this culture is a bit different. And it's always interesting to see, because gambling is also a part of a country's culture. So to see how this culture is applied in different jurisdictions, and also I think one commonality and the reason why they have so many different jurisdictions actually regulating gambling is because obviously there's a lot of revenue that is generated by countries from gambling, and I guess it's been, Malta was the first country to regulate online gambling over 20 years ago, and today we have so many national licenses, and William has a number of national licenses, and most companies have a number of national licenses, and that is evidence of the revenue that is generated from this industry, and also the fact that gambling is an age-old means of entertainment, and finally many countries are saying that this is something that should be regulated.
As you mentioned, national licensing, of course this has been a continued battle also in many court decisions. You also work in EU affairs at MGA, right? And of course, naturally it would be Malta's position that free movement of services is also to apply in that area. And as we know, with many court decisions, EU law has had an impact in some jurisdictions, certainly notably in Sweden, where it has led or has been a factor for the change of the system. But the reality is national licensing in many jurisdictions, which will lead me back to your current role now, Annika, if you permit. In your current role now with William Hill, of course you work on various matters, various jurisdictions, but the UK must be a huge part of your work, and I would like you to tell us a bit about your current work, what you cover in your new role, and how this may somehow be different, of course, to working as a regulator.
Yeah, okay, so I've been very lucky in the sense that I've managed to keep a regulatory role within the industry, and I kept doing exactly what I really love to do about my other job, which was getting to know different jurisdictions and meeting various regulators, and I guess in a sense it's still the same. UK is a huge part of William Hill's business. Historically, William Hill started, of course, in UK. William Hill was an Englishman who started the gambling business, and obviously William Hill's roots are in the UK, but of course William Hill today has a number of national licenses across the world, and it targets various jurisdictions across the world, and it's grown internationally at a very fast pace. And my role as senior counsel regulatory is actually looking at all these jurisdictions and all the existing and non-existing markets that we are in, and understanding how we can offer our service to consumers in various markets and on what basis, and whether or not to obtain a license, and whether a license is available or not, and always making sure that any operations in any jurisdictions are, of course, legally justified, and that we are doing so in accordance with the regulations that underpin our various licenses. So in a sense, it works, but it's actually quite similar to what I was doing before, but obviously taking a very different route. But like I said before, I mean, once you've been with the regulator, my role was actually head of enforcement in a way. So once you've been with the regulator for so long, you have an ingrained sense of compliance, and you never shake that off, and you shouldn't, because the industry has matured to a point where we are understanding the cost of non-compliance, and compliance is actually sustainability, and what we all want is a very sustainable industry. And clients and customers, players keep coming back and not just going out to have a gambling problem or lead us down a rabbit hole of AML investigations. So compliance is definitely something that every business is now being centered around. And that is why I guess we are seeing the growth of these companies in the compliance roles, and people coming from the public sector into the private sector. And I think that there should be a lot of investment by regulators around the world into making sure that their public sector employees are actually given the resources to grow themselves, because once they do move into the industry and it's a natural shift, they are equipped and able to transfer that ingrained compliance culture back into the industry.
Wonderful. Janika, you have just mentioned a few times responsible gambling, and also before you drafted on the responsible gambling framework in Malta. Now we still have an ongoing review process of the Gambling Act in the UK that looks at similar issues, problem gambling issues, increased measures in the industry to take care of these issues. How do you see these developments, again, from your maybe also former experience in actually drafting down hands-on regulation and guidance to the industry?
Yeah, I think the UK Gambling Commission is also becoming increasingly closer to the industry, in the sense that there's a long period in which we are able to review any upcoming changes and see how they will apply to the business. I think it's this shift towards more stronger player protection and more stronger AML requirements we can be seen around the world. I was just at a conference in Malta last week, actually this week on Tuesday, and we were talking about the dangers of over-regulation, and we need to be very careful with over-regulation. This is something that we've been saying for a very long time, especially a country like Malta that has been subject to so many different reviews and FATF and grey listing and whatever has led to what is probably a culture of over-regulation. And we always must remember that what gambling is a means of entertainment, and people have been gambling since the beginning of time, and they will continue to gamble. Now, whether or not they do so in a regulated environment with the necessary regulations or not depends very much on the legal frameworks within which operators are allowed to operate. So if it becomes so over-regulated and impossible and unattractive for players will still find means to gamble, and probably not in a regulated environment, which actually ends up being extremely counterproductive for all the legislators involved, and for obviously the operators who will be losing revenue. So I believe we need all the regulators, all the legislators need to be keeping this in mind. But this is also something that actually places an element of responsibility on operators. So operators should themselves be making sure that they are compliant with regulations, that they maintain a close relationship with regulators, so that we are actually on the same side, and we want to raise the floor. We want to raise what is common practice, we want to raise the standards of the industry, so that regulators, are not placed in an uncomfortable situation where they need to impose restrictions that are just not, that just don't make sense and don't work for the industry. The industry needs to be allowed to operate, but that there is a sense of responsibility of raising the standards on both the jurisdictions within which we are regulated and also on the operators.
Yes, indeed. The former panel actually mentioned the importance of a high generalization rate for each jurisdiction. Mentioned a few examples where this is arguably going very well, including Denmark and the UK. UK is known to have a high generalization rate. by the way, without having payment blocking, without having domain blocking measures in place. Just on a side note, would you see that high channelization rate endangered if certain, let's say, brought up or discussed measures currently in the Gambling Act review were to be implemented?
I think it's always very interesting when jurisdictions actually measure channelization rate. Like when I was at the NGO, I was always asked about channelization rates, and there was always the issue of how to measure the illegal market, because if you know the size of it, then of course then you should be able to control it. But I believe that when we have decent regulations and regulations that are being actually written with the success of the industry in mind, and both the UK Gambling Commission and the Motor Gaming Authority and most authorities have the sustainability of the industry at their core. So once they're written in this manner, and then yes, there will be an increased rate of channelization, and it will be positive for, of course, all the operators who seek to obtain local licenses and seek to actually be compliant and have a sustainable operation.
I can't help to raise a further issue in the context of channelization, which is the issue of advertisement bans that seem to be spreading in Europe like mushrooms. One is struck, at least discussed in many jurisdictions and already implemented in some. Advertisement, no doubt, can impact on the channelization, and I'm thinking here not only about the comparison between the regulated offer and the unregulated offer, but also notably between new operators in the market that, in my view, would depend even more on being able to advertise their offer than very well established operators in the market. So there also, in my view, is actually an element of competition law involved in the fair level playing field. Do you see signs in the UK that this could go down a dangerous road, the discussion and actual implementation of advertisement bans?
I think this again boils down to the responsibility of certain operators around the degree of advertising around certain events and the content of such events. But I do think that the industry in the UK and internationally has recognized the pressures that are being placed both on them and on the regulator in terms of the content of certain advertisements and in terms of the intensity of these advertisements again around certain events and on TV, etc. So I think that it would very much depend also on what the operators do about it. I've always been a firm believer in not necessarily self-regulation. I don't think it always needs to go that far, but also in the sense of responsibility and maturity. I think the industry has matured much more than even when I joined 8 years ago. It was very different. And when I was at the MGA, I always spoke out very fiercely against advertising bans. And I don't think that they actually do solve anything. I think that they leave certain, especially new players, new customers, without not knowing what is actually regulated and what isn't. And I don't think that helps anyone. But I think that balance will always be the obvious and cliche and very, very key word in advertising. And I do believe today that we're much closer to a balance actually being struck than before. I think before we went from having a barrage of advertisements and then there were talks of bans in certain countries, and then the bans actually didn't work, like we saw in some countries. So I'm not sure a ban ever works on anything. I don't think that banning something which is inevitable actually leads to a ban. I think it just leads to an underground operation. But then again, I do believe in balance, and I do believe that operators have the responsibility to make sure that their advertising is actually balanced.
Yes, balanced, of course, could refer to not just the quality and the messaging that it contains, but also possibly could refer to the sheer quantity. And I believe a trigger in the UK was that at some point, watching TV, it was difficult to see other advertisements than gambling advertisements at certain hours. So it would appear that that kind of factor, that kind of reality also hit back to the industry, where certain people usually not interested in gambling issues or gambling policy would have said that this is simply too much.
Yeah. Again, I think the intensity of the advertising was an issue and still is an issue in the UK. I think the responsibility again is on operators, and I'm not sure about them actually ever solved anything, but we need to see, at least we need to understand that the content and the intensity of these advertisements will have an effect on policymakers and what they eventually decide to do in the end.
Yes, thank you indeed. There are a couple of questions that I would strongly recommend to ask any policymaker when they are considering such advertisement plans. One would be, what is actually policy goal? A question all too often forgotten. So what is actually the objective? What are you trying to reach with this? This should be very, very clearly defined. And then in relation to that policy goal, another important question I think is, what is the actual empirical evidence for what you're trying to do, or for what you're arguing to do? Is there any empirical evidence at all that would indicate that these measures would actually help the policy goal? And then thirdly, if one claims to act as an authority in a state run by the rule of law, then it's appropriate to ask about the principle of proportionality. So is that measure suitable, and is it also necessary to achieve that goal? And I think those three questions are all too often forgotten and should be more intensely raised, maybe also by industry representatives in their meetings. Coming back to your day-to-day role, Jannica. So it's been 2-3 months. I reckon the work rhythm has been pretty high. You're working also from in the London office, and I wonder, about your work rhythm, how it is. Can you set aside certain time slots to actually contemplate about issues which seem important, given your important regulatory role for the company, or is it very much about coming up next issue to solve and simply a very high rhythm?
I think setting time aside is one of the most important parts of my daily routine, and I do that also to understand the mentality and what goes on within certain aspects and regulations. Like I said, I think one of the foundations of what I do and what other regulatory councils do is understanding what underpins the certain shifts within regulations and what is going on. I think what certain new regulations and new requirements are normally a reflection of what is going on within a jurisdiction. And I know more than anyone that the employees of regulators are just normal people who are actually responding to certain situations that have either come about within the country or by operators or by players. So it's important to understand what is underpinning those and always maintaining conversation with those regulators and maintaining a good relationship with them, and I set a lot of time aside for that and speaking to and understanding regulators, because I know the pains of being a regulator. And I know that when I was a regulator, I really wanted people from the operation to speak up and tell me what I didn't know, and vice versa. So I think it's one of the core foundations of jobs like mine and of successful operators in the industry to actually maintain the conversation, understand certain issues, and of course abide by the regulations and by the notification requirements, etc. So that in the end we can achieve the common goal, which is the sustainability of the industry for different reasons, but we have the same goal, us and regulators alike.
Thank you. I also want to make sure that we reach out on time to the audience and see whether we have questions to our special guest, Jannika Sand, whether we have comments on the issues that have been raised so far, and we'll be more than happy to pick them up. There must be some. From the Nordics? Okay, not yet, maybe later on. Then I'll just move on. I think part of your work is also to look at the various markets in the world, and for sure William Hill has many of these, and traditionally they might fall into different colors. Some might refer to them as white markets, black markets, and then there are gray tones, gray markets. It must be part of your work also to look into these issues and kind of the exposure that the company may have in different markets. Would you like to mention a couple of criteria, that typically you would look at, or typically you would find relevant?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the most obvious criteria would be the legal framework within that country and what underpins it, and the legal status of gambling within that country, and again, what underpins that. So, like I was mentioning earlier, there was a time, just over 20 years ago, where Malta was the only country that regulates online gambling, and actually had a licensing framework, and today there's loads of local licenses across the EU and across the world. And it's one of the most important things that must be done is actually examine the different frameworks in the different countries and understanding what and how we could operate, and whether or not a national license is available, and if one is available, whether it's desirable for us to target that market and obtain that license. Obviously, I'm not the one making these decisions. Actually, I've obviously only been here for like 2 or 3 months, but that is what underpins the decision in the various countries, and understanding the framework, and of course making sure that any offer is legally justified, and making sure that the players that are being targeted remain targeted in a safe environment and compliant with the regulations that underpin our various national licenses.
So would you say, is it a fair summary, since you mentioned the notion of is it legally justifiable? Would that be a fair criterion of distinguishing staying in a grey market versus leaving a market because it's considered a black market?
I don't think there's a universal understanding of what is grey and what is black and what is white, to be honest. I think everyone just defines it in their own way, and various occurrences that go on in the world actually tend to change the status of many countries at a very, very fast pace. We get a new licensing framework, we change the label of a country, we get unfortunate events going on in certain countries that like events very external to gambling that would change the status of a country. So I don't think there's a fixed definition of what is white, grey or black, and I don't think that there really should be. I think that it's up to every operator to determine their own risk framework and how they would like to operate within that framework, and their risk appetite. And I remember having the same risk type of framework when you work with the regulator too, and it's always changing. So it depends on the particular operator and how they would like to approach that market.
Yes, allow me in the context of topical developments, then also to briefly ask, since this has been out in the open, it's clear that there has been an interest by 888 to merge the endeavor with William Hill. Has this already affected also your work tasks in any way? Do you get additional work done?
No, obviously, it hasn't had such an effect yet, but we really look forward to working with 888. The date is actually upcoming and it's very close to happening. I look forward to it. We all are. We are yet to see how, of course, we'll be able to work together and improve the business that will then be one business. I think it's a very exciting time for the company and for everyone involved. Especially because we will be looking at areas that perhaps William hadn't entered into yet and vice versa. So it's a very exciting time for the company. It should be upcoming soon. We don't envisage that there will be any negative impacts on either of our businesses. So I think it's a very exciting time and we definitely look forward to it, and you'll be hearing more from us when that actually comes about very soon. It's obviously increased my workload in the running to that. So I'm very grateful to be having this discussion. I'm not thinking about that for a while, but it's something that is exciting all of us here at the moment.
Thank you. We're keen to looking forward to hearing more news about this. And indeed, you mentioned additional jurisdictions, additional markets. So who knows? Maybe at some point in the future, you might be working from a different continent, an office in a different continent. Understand?
I wouldn't really mind. I just moved to London though, so I might give it some time. I like London, even though I'm coming back to London for holidays. But I do like London, so I'll probably give it some time. But who knows? Yeah, who knows? I wouldn't mind. Given
the expansion strategy of 888 towards Africa, this is maybe a continent you might want to look into. So, thank you very much, Jannika. I want to make sure that I look again to the audience. If there are any questions or remarks to any issues we have raised. Jannika, from your side, have we missed out on anything we want to cover?
So I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might want to also send over. I'm easily accessible also on my LinkedIn, so I'm happy to have any discussions about. I also just really enjoy discussing various topics that are ongoing in the industry. I really enjoy working in the industry, and I think that these discussions that you're having, Simon, are also very, very useful, because it's important to always remember that there are people within this industry that want to talk about things and not just. This industry is so dynamic and fast-paced that it is really formed by all of us present at these events that actually want to talk about and improve the certain workings of the industry. So honestly, thank you for the opportunity, and I wish the best of luck to all the panelists and all the attendees attending this event.
Thank you, Jannika. I can fully agree. It's important that the industry actually takes the bull by the horns, tackles the issues, and really discusses these in open space and addresses the issues before they are regulated in unfortunate ways. So thank you very much, Jannika, for being with us, and let's give her a hand. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Jannika. So now we